2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
She was tear-gassed and beaten.
Images of thousands desperate to escape Taliban oppression filled our news feeds. More than 80,000 Afghans made it to America. But the story didn't end there.
It was very cold. There was no power, no heat.
Who would help our newest neighbors? I'm Andrea Smartin. In Stranger Becomes Neighbor, you'll hear the stories of some remarkable refugees who left their homes and their dreams behind, only to start over from zero.
Their only possession was 3 blankets.
And you'll meet Americans who stepped up to help them.
You want me to come when you deliver your baby.
What can one person do in the face of an international disaster decades in the making? That's Stranger Becomes Neighbor. Find us at kslpodcast.com. Follow us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you listen.
Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, it's a podcast about recovery. My name is Casey Scott, and my road to recovery began with Pinnacle Recovery Center. If you know somebody who needs some help, have them do what I did and give Pinnacle Recovery Center a call. Dr. Matt, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Hey, so we just got done with Thanksgiving. I got to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Because this is going to tell me what kind of guy you are.
Uh-oh. Okay.
When making your turkey,
yeah,
are you pro-bag or anti-bag?
Bag in the turkey, the giblets inside?
No. Cooking it in a turkey bag.
In a turkey bag.
Yeah.
Oh.
Because I was talking to my girlfriend, and we were doing turkeys at her house. I smoked a turkey.
Okay.
And I said,
that's a good way to go.
Yeah. And I said, so how are you going to do yours? And I said, what bag are you going to use? And she goes, I don't use a bag.
Yeah, I've never seen anybody use a bag.
Oh, it's the best.
Yeah, I have to admit I've never cooked my own turkey, though.
Really?
But I used to live in Kansas, and that's the land of deep frying turkeys. And then the day after Thanksgiving in the newspaper are a list of all the people that burned their houses down.
Yeah.
Because they were drunk and while they were deep frying their turkeys.
Which those two things should never go together.
No, I do not
Drinking
recommend
and deep frying.
Deep frying, never.
Unless it's at the state fair. Then it makes complete sense.
Well, I don't know. That you're still taking a risk, I think.
Well, you're letting the professionals deep fry at the state fair.
I had a delicious turkey this year, but I don't know if it was bagged or unbagged. I forgot to ask that. I just ate it, and I was grateful for my turkey. It's got to be good to
be the doctor. Just show up, turkey's done.
I had a wonderful Thanksgiving this year over at my girlfriend's house with all of her family, and they made delicious food, and man, I was just grateful to be there and hang out with all of them. So
I love that.
I can find out for you for the future.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love that.
Dilemma.
It's not going to affect our friendship.
Okay, good.
It just knows.
Right.
It just lets me know.
You won't judge me if I'm a no-bagger.
You know, that's the great thing about the recovery world. And in all seriousness, I'll get back on point now, is there really isn't a lot of judgment in the recovery world.
I think for the people that are going through it for the right reasons and the healthy ways, that's one of the first things you learn to let go of is being judgmental.
Yeah, because I know in my active addiction, I thought I was alone, and I'd isolate, and I'd sit on the back deck, and I just would just think, why am I the only one broken? Why can't I do this? And then, through recovery, I go, I wasn't the only one, and I wasn't broken. I just needed to fine-tune some stuff, and that's what it's about. So let's get to the guest today, and I'm really excited about this because this show's been in the making for about a month now.
Yeah.
I've wanted him on the show. We've got a mutual friend. His name is Arch, and he's an interventionist, and he's in recovery. So, Arch, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Casey.
All right. So first, we like to let people know a little bit about you before we get to what good things you're doing in the recovery world right now. So where does the story of Arch begin, and how long have you been in recovery?
Yeah. Well, before I get into my story, I want to say that my disease escalated to some pretty serious levels, but I never smoked a turkey, Casey.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
he knew where to draw the line.
Yeah. I mean, come on, dude.
Turkeys, it's bad. A gateway drug.
Yeah, that's some serious denial there, man. Yeah, and I've heard if you're not in 5 12-step programs that you're into serious denial.
Yeah, right, there you go.
So I'm trying to figure out which one is smoking a turkey.
Yeah.
So I've been clean and sober in recovery for almost 36 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think he's got the record.
That's a record on our show.
I got sober when I was 5.
Early 40s. I would have pegged you 41, 42.
Yeah, I was 23.
23.
Yeah. and hit bottom. Right? Haven't found it necessary to pick up a drink or a drug. I mean, I've had my challenges with sex and money and power, and I consider myself to be a recovering sex addict. I've got all sorts of issues around that I'm well into recovery on around money, and I'm quite aware of with knowing the programs of AA and the other 12-step programs. I know them very, very well. I don't talk about whether I'm a member or not in respect for the traditions, so we'll just leave it at that. But the founder of AA, Bill W., at 18 or 20 years sober, was a raging sex addict and suicidal and a mess with his finances and his sex life, and he ended up contributing to the work of the 12th step. The 12 and 12 book.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think it's fascinating for a lot of people out there because, I was heavy into drinking when I was in my 20s. And I think a lot of my friends and family thought, well, this is just a phase and most people will grow out of this. And so there wasn't a lot of talk of an intervention or that. It was just like, hey, you're drinking quite a bit. But it wasn't, I don't think you think of someone being 23 being an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just me being naive, but I also think the public probably perceives it much like that, too, of going, he's 23. This is what 23-year-olds do.
Sure, yeah. I was a ski racer. I was a professional ski racer. I was on the U.S. ski team for a little while.
Do you know my boy Scotty Hoffman?
Oh, I know Scotty very well. Yep. And I know
he's also in recovery.
I know him in recovery, too, yeah.
He's going to be on the podcast coming up in January.
Nice, yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah.
Yep. So we were racing around the same time, and so I had myself kind of convinced I was an athlete, which I was, but I had two personalities, right? Mm-hmm. I had the Jekyll and Hyde thing. I was a ski racer and trained seriously for it. Up until in the end, I wasn't able to do that. But I was the
two worlds collided.
Yeah, and of course that was a fast-paced world. Mm-hmm. But I was ski racer and athlete during the day, and party at night, and in the end, it got me. So. But
that was kind of what was expected.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't my world. I thought everybody was that way, but because it isn't what's expected, right?
No, it's not.
And yet, that's what I thought. But I know now too. As you mentioned, an interventionist, and we're going to talk about that. I also went back not long ago, well into midlife, and got a master's degree. And I went from a finance guy to I'm now a psychotherapist and have a private practice in addition to my intervention work. So I study the approaches to treating addiction as well.
And it seems those approaches there's becoming more of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I like to see is that I believe there's a pretty clear shift from Western medicine, managed care, to more of the trauma, holistic, which would include 12-step programs, spiritual, holistic, trauma-based, organic type recovery approaches.
Dr. Matt and myself both meditate, and we
nice.
really for me, that was really a crucial part to my recovery. And you speak about it.
Oh, I can't say enough good about meditation. In fact, as a cognitive behavioral therapist, that has become kind of a standard aspect to how we go about most of our treatments, whether it's in recovery or working with people with anxiety and depression, learning how to incorporate mindfulness and meditation. And my story on that is I was very skeptical of it. Even when I was in graduate school, I didn't want to hear about this hippie stuff. And it wasn't until after I was practicing that I started to read articles, neuroscience-based articles that showed, prefrontal cortex, parts of your brain that have to do with focus, concentration, judgment, reason. All of those parts of the brain grow in density as you meditate, and you feel more calm and focused. You make better decisions. All the things that we need in the world of recovery, right? You need to make good decisions as you're going through the world of recovery. And so, meditation is highly important. I always encourage people to figure out a way to incorporate that in their day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's get back to your story. You're traveling around the world. You're ski racing. You're living a fast-paced life. how does the alcohol and drugs affect you?
Well, let's pause just for a sec.
Wow.
I want to go back further. Like, at what point were you introduced? Was it just in your ski racing that you started to use alcohol?
Oh, no.
So tell us a little bit about your younger life and when you were first introduced to drugs or alcohol.
Sure. Well, my story, I believe, is quite typical, if not overwhelmingly, what we see, which is I grew up in a family system that was quite traumatized. I'm a big believer in developmental trauma as the primary driver of addiction, and I did have it's not a blame game to be looking at that. It's just reality.
Just trying to understand, right?
Yeah, and my parents, their shortcomings, they were both addicts. Themselves, they did the best they knew how, I believe, and yet they were practicing the same ways of parenting and that they went through. So I had a lot of I now know, largely due to meditation and CBT and my own journey before I became a psychotherapist and et cetera. I know now that I had I was repressing feelings growing up because of the neglect and abandonment and abuse and stuff that happened for both my brother and myself growing up. And so I was looking for a way to medicate my deep pains and fear and shame when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. Crap was going on, yep. And so, I found weed, alcohol, and sex all within about 3 months at 12 years old.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Even sex at 12 years old.
Yep. That was actually a babysitter.
Oh.
And that actually, put in motion for the next, up until about 15 years ago, I realized how much I was using sex and relationship type, interactions and behaviors as a way to, in long-term sobriety with chemicals, was using that to continue to stay disconnected from my feelings and to try to manage my life.
Two years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
There's desperation and anguish.
More than 80,000 Afghans have since arrived in America, but this story is still unfolding. I'm Andrea Smartin. In my new podcast, Stranger Becomes Neighbor, we'll find out what happens to these new arrivals in our communities. Who would help our newest neighbors? Follow us at kslpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.
And I think you bring up a really important point, and that is that when a person doesn't do the work of understanding what's driving their addiction, a person may enter a program for something specific like alcohol, but if they don't really do the work to understand their own trauma history, or however they want to describe that, what is driving this addiction, then they end up shifting, don't they?
Absolutely.
And so we may get sober from alcohol or other substances, but that may shift into gambling, sex, other financial things. And so it's not until a person really does that deeper work, I think, that they can really be free from things that control them.
Sure. In fact, there's I've heard there's roughly 250 12-step programs.
Oh, are there really?
That's what I've heard, and I know quite a few of them.
They're probably all needed.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And yet there's one of them in particular that actually has just started to grow in Utah, FYI, and in Salt Lake and Park City, I know, that's called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. And it's the clinician's favorite program, I'll venture to say, is something I can say on behalf of clinicians, because it approaches things from our trauma story and how all addictions are just a trauma reaction, like PTSD. In fact, you were talking about things that are clearly, about how that works. That limbic part of our brain. You talked about the prefrontal cortex, but we basically just get locked into a reactive state,
Absolutely.
Fight, flight, freeze, and in the various addictions, of which there's tons more than you mentioned, and then and some of them are very acceptable and culturally supported. Workaholism,
that's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you
Even the gym,
you bet.
Exercise, you bet.
And if you're working, my therapy practice is in Park City, and there's a lot of wealth up there and a lot of families that, hey, man, if we're bringing in the dough, everything's okay, right?
Yeah.
And you check with their kids. Yeah, you check with their kids, and
things aren't all right.
No, things aren't all right.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point.
Yeah.
So marijuana, alcohol, sex at 12.
Yep.
You said that lasted, until 15?
Well, no. The alcohol and drug. Well, those three things. It was 23 that I finally figured out the chemicals weren't going to work. But it was a juggling act. Grew up in Michigan, and I went off to a ski racing academy in Vermont, which was a great opportunity. It was also escape from my family, which I needed. At 14, I was able to go out there, and I just barely kept the wheels on the wagon with ski racing and getting in trouble at night. And I was kicked out of camps, racing camps out of the country because I'd get caught out partying. I was getting in trouble.
You were the bad boy.
I was the bad boy. Yep. It seems like most of the time there's a bad boy. It has for quite a few years. There hasn't been one quite as glaring as maybe Bodie or some of those. Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it was also a badge of honor. But it was you said you were just trying to keep the wheels on.
Sure. Yeah, and a lot of my identity and ego strength was based in things like that, external things. And partying, sure. That was...
Well, ski racing's also, that's interesting that you bring that up, that's a rush.
Oh, man.
Right? You're living right on the edge.
You're going to like this. Yeah. So 25 years, maybe about 22 years sober with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. Was living in Vail, Colorado. A buddy of mine in recovery, and I bought high-performance crotch rockets and decided we were going to get into racing motorcycles.
Yeah.
Okay? And I went 160 miles an hour on a motorcycle at one point, and with little kids at home.
Yeah.
And I will admit now I'm a master's mountain bike racer.
Okay.
And
that's
so,
also...
I'm in recovery, but let's be honest, there's still some...
You got to trigger those neurochemicals sometimes.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah. And as I didn't add it, in addition to becoming a counselor, I also got a certification, which is a sex addiction certification. I'm what's called a CSAT. And that's grounded in trauma training. And I learned about 4 neural pathways that our addictions are aimed at managing those neural pathways, which are feelings. And one of them is arousal.
Oh, yeah.
High risk, right, Doc? You get know that. Arousal and high risk, which makes us feel alive. And that's cocaine, which I was big time. I didn't add. That came along later. Coke is what made me hit bottom, thankfully.
You're like the Dos Equis guy, the most interesting man in the world.
Story after story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so cocaine's the one that brought you down, but you said, going through the ski racing stuff. At any point, did any of the coaches, the counselors, they come and go, hey, look, you want to take a look at this?
Yeah, I think I'm here today. I think I'm alive today because of one coach in particular who broke the news to me that, I was on the U.S. ski team. It was the developmental team. I wasn't Olympian and wanted to be, and I was 16 when I was named to the developmental team, so I had plenty of opportunity. But I was getting in trouble, and this was one of the coaches at the academy out in Vermont, and I didn't know he did, and he was a psychologist before he became a coach. So, yeah, right? And he did some research after one of my trouble events, and found out about the train wreck at home with my mother's alcoholism and those problems, and he pulled me in. He's like, "Hey, bad news! The team doesn't want to have you on it anymore." That was disappointing to hear.
That's rough.
And at the same time, I want to tell you this might be an opportunity to save your life because I know a little bit about you, and I want to talk to you about it. And that stuck in my mind.
So he really just laid it out for you.
And I was 16.
How did you feel having him talk to you about that?
I was scared, terrified, crying, and because I knew it was the truth. At that point, I knew it was out of control. But like all addicts, I was managing it. There were periods of perceived, of control. But I would go another 7 years, right? With increasing levels of unmanageability and consequences.
But to be 16, to have a mentor sit you down and take away your dream of being on the Olympic ski team, and not only that, throw on top of that, hey, I know your family life at home's messed up.
Yeah, it was a strong... I hadn't thought about that in a long time. You guys asking how I felt, that was... for a guy that had tucked away his feelings, that was one of the few times that I It really got through to me. In fact, typical addict drama, I said, George, I'm going to prove to you that I'm going to quit drinking. It was drinking that I got in trouble on. Yeah. And I said, I'm going to write it in blood right here. He said, you got a pen? A pin? And I poked my finger. And
you actually did?
I don't think I wrote the whole thing, but I think I signed it in blood, and I swore that I would never drink again.
Wow. And how many times I swore to myself I would never drink again?
Yeah.
I mean, Did
you write it in blood, though?
No, well, I'm afraid of needles. Yeah. But I mean, I would sit there, and I had that conversation with myself. I can't tell you how many times. I'm never doing this again. I'm never doing this again. Please. Or I would make deals with God. Hey, look, let me get out of this, and I will never do this again.
And we mean it.
Yeah. And I know I only talk to you when I need something, but, man, if you can really help me out on this one, I'll never do it again. Yeah. And that was short-lived.
Yep. That's our level of delusion that we have. Because I tell people in my intervention business and in, when I'm helping them as friends, that, the addict is sincere when they're in that cycle of, Yeah.
And they believe it.
And so, and if you're not a professional, and even if you are, boy, good luck not getting sucked in. Okay, well, he sure seems sincere.
Well, because you're feeling that sincerity, that hope that they have at that moment.
Yeah, and that's just had a fellow therapist put it nicely, that the level of denial that we display, which certainly if we've convinced ourselves that we don't have a problem to get out of a jam, the thickness of the denial is as thick as the trauma was.
Oh, to match that.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And,
So at 16, your dreams are crushed, and you're told that your family life's a mess. Mm-hmm. Where do you go from there?
Well, I went home that summer to Michigan, and promptly did deliver with not drinking. I was smoking weed every day and doing coke and that kind of thing.
But you weren't drinking.
No, darn right.
I signed it in blood.
Oh, yeah. So, kind of kept it together, finished up school, or that might have been my senior year, actually. Yeah, so I was 17, I think. So that was my senior year because I didn't come back. But I managed to actually get a scholarship to come ski for the University of Utah. It was technically on their B team, but they said, if you can get it together, we'll have a spot for you. And I had some scholarship money. So, and they were, still are, a very good program. So I was excited to be out here for that. But when I got out here, I just imploded on campus. I finished my first year at the U, fully enrolled as a freshman in 1979 with a .8 GPA. And
so room for improvement.
Plenty.
You almost have to work at it to get a .8 GPA.
That's what my dad would say. He goes, you got to work to get an F, son. Yeah. Just show up and you'll give you a C. And if you get an F, you have to put in some work.
Yeah. So at that time, there was a pro skiing tour, because I got kicked out of the U. There was a pro skiing tour. Scotty Hoffman will remember this. It was dual racing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I was able to put together some sponsors because of my past success, and I had about a 4 or 5 year. I was living in Park City and racing around the U.S. on the tour and had sponsorship, and up till 83, 84 was did well, was in the top 30 in the world, and was consistently in the top 16 in the dual format, and then that life was really fast paced.
At that point, when you got that success, top 30 in the world, do you feel like you proved your past coaches and everybody wrong, that you did have something?
Yeah. I don't know that I was skiing competitively any better than I was back at 16, 17, to be honest. But I was definitely skiing well.
But it probably fed to your belief that you didn't have a problem, that you were.
Oh yeah, and hence the.
What's that world like? What's the culture though of going on tour as a professional ski racer? Mm-hmm. What are the
bunnies?
What are the nights like? What happens?
Yeah, well, and versus professional athletics in many other areas, my father used to call it I was a glorified ski bum, because it so I do kind of look back now. I mean, it was. It's not like pro football or something where there's all that money flying around. But
didn't have that money, didn't have that exposure. But
there were, a few of us that would close the bars at night and be out there first thing in the morning. I mean, a number of times I was still still high.
Hammered,
Still
yeah.
hammered, yep.
I would, because what I know about the world of professional sports, a lot of people, regardless of the sport, because of all that touring around the country and sometimes around the world, I mean, it's, race or perform during the day and party at night.
Yep. And,
Expected to do both.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And then in the ski towns, of course, the partying is what everyone's doing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So
resorts, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it was crazy. Yep.
So you said cocaine took you down. Is that when you got involved with that during the skiing racing?
Yeah. I mean, well, I'd actually started back when I was a teenager too, but had hide it more. But I was bartending up in Park City, and training up there, and then would leave for races on the weekends, mostly in the Western U.S. But the whole bartending scene in the 80s in Park City was a lot of cocaine flowing. And I remember at one point in time, one of the regular customers, I knew he was an attorney, and I was selling him cocaine under a napkin and running it through the cash register because the owner of the bar was a coke addict too. And so I was able to have the money go through like that. He could pay with a credit card for his coke. Oh. And late one night he said, hey, Arch, I don't know if you know what kind of an attorney I am, but I work for some department in Utah. And he pulled out a letter from the DEA, the federal DEA, of 35 names of people that they were looking at in the Intermountain region. And my name was on it.
Oh.
And because I was tied in with some pretty big players.
Wow.
And I thought about that good and hard for about 20 minutes and then just went back to doing what I was doing.
So I was going to ask what effect it had on you, but not much, I guess. Huh?
No. In fact, I probably even kind of bragged about it a little bit.
Badge of honor stuff. Huh?
Yeah, right. Yeah, really disconnected from any sense of self-care.
Right. Because that's like a piece of paper that shows you're self-destructive. You're on a bad path.
Yep.
So much that the government knows about you.
Yeah. Do you think that'd be a good sign?
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's like, hey.
And then it was shortly thereafter I flew back to Michigan and went to rehab, and story's been sobriety ever since. But two guys, one of them a roommate at the time, were shortly after I went to rehab arrested and did well over 10 years of time.
Wow. That could have been you.
Totally. Oh, it would have been, I'm quite confident.
So 38 years ago, when you checked into this rehab, was there a thing called rock bottom back then? Do you know what your rock bottom looked like, or what was your motivation to get into a rehab?
It was really, I'd call it an existential, just sick and tired of being sick and tired was one of the phrases I heard. And I had lost the sponsors. I'd lost 35 pounds in about 3 months. Oh, and I was about 160 pounds at my, fighting ski racing weight. Mm-hmm. And the wheels had just come off the wagon from my most successful year racing. I just was, in my mind, celebrating, and I now know I was still medicating old buried pains and fears and things, but it just got out of control, and I was literally unaware of how I completely missed the summer training period. And I couldn't have anyway. I was doing I was up 3 and 4 nights in a row with the help of cocaine and not sleeping, and I had blackouts that lasted multiple days. I ended up in Las Vegas and don't know how to this day I even got there. And so it was, and then my sponsors, none of my equipment showed up, still thinking I was going to ski race. And my skis would usually,
You're delusional.
Delusional, yeah. I'd get all this equipment shipped to me in October for the upcoming season. Nothing came. I make a couple phone calls, and they're like, dude, it's a small world. We know what you've been up to. You're done with us. So the pain of that, even though as I look back, I wouldn't trade a place in the Olympics or a medal in the Olympics. Quite honestly, I would not trade that for what I've gotten from hitting bottom and recovering. You know that,
yeah,
right?
I'm grateful.
Yeah,
and I used to think that was crazy. I would sit in rooms and people would come up and go, "This is the best thing that ever happened to me," and I would go, "You are out of your mind.
Exactly.
How could this be the best thing that happened to you? Because right now, where I'm sitting, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me." Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I could change my perspective and go, "Hey, I'm given a gift to get my life back."
Totally. Yeah. Yep. Well, that's me too. And then I think there's Bill W. once again came up with emotional sobriety, and that's what that ACA program is. It's about emotional sobriety. AA is too, and a lot of the other programs. That's what the 12 steps are designed for. And yet, a lot of people just kind of work them a little bit and then sit in meetings, and they don't go for that emotional sobriety. So I view my recovery as that back then in '83, rehab and chemical sobriety, and then again about 15 years ago, it took another turn to where I've dug into process addictions and really, really gotten honest with my recovery to where. And there was a 24-year marriage that ended. I completely changed my career. I mean, I did an about-face in practically every aspect of my life.
What did a rehab center look like in '83?
Yeah. Well, there were 11 of us men. It was totally 100% 12-step based. I mean, I wasn't a therapist then. I'm sure they were doing some CBT and DBT and other things.
They might have been, but really the 12 steps were the main modality.
It was the gold standard
at that time. Yeah.
And Hazelden was the place kind of nationally.
Yeah.
But it was in Midland, Michigan, the place I went to. The whole staff was 12-steppers, 11 men. I was about 20 years sober and checked back in, and 9 of them had died or gone back to prison. They were all court-ordered except me. And there was one guy who did make it long-term. So that right there was a little statistic, 2 out of 11.
Yeah, not good odds.
And my therapist, this is interesting, the guy I really resonated with. I was about 3 weeks sober. It was 10 weeks, which I think now I really am hopeful for a public system and private people can pay and do this, but like longer, up to 90 days is so much better than 30, and we know that, right?
Yeah.
But, so I came in about 3 weeks in, and this guy was just my lifeline. His name was Strawberry. And they came to us and they said, Strawberry won't be in. Strawberry had like 15 years of sobriety. He was a therapist. And why? What's up? He got arrested last night, raped a woman at knife point.
Oh, my goodness.
And I remember that like, whoa, I was just getting a shred of hope of all. And then they did something weird. They took all of us to the jail to say goodbye to him.
What?
Is that wacky or what?
I mean, that's odd.
So what was rehab like in '84?
Yeah.
At that place, it was a little wonky in a lot of ways. But that was a sad story there. But it was a sobering story.
Well, what effect did that have on your motivation?
I think that whacked me with, wow, this thing has a mind of its own.
Somebody who's 15 years sober.
Yeah, and he was a sweetheart. He wasn't a troubled man, but I don't know how much the drinking took him over.
But part of him was a helpful therapist for you.
Yeah. And I probably credit my success to some degree to his recovery and working in the field, like so many of us do. Yeah. So it was a house that somebody bought and turned into a tree. So in some ways, not different.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I think that was probably the case because at that point we now benefit as every decade goes by and research is done. We benefit from knowing what works and what doesn't, and it's a very different world in recovery now, incorporating so many different modalities like we've talked about in the past on this show. And there just weren't options that people knew about, and so they were doing the best they could, I guess.
Yeah, right.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.